We are now recording. So if you guys remember from last Wednesday, the thing that we were talking about was we know that muscular fitness is an important thing, right? We know that muscular strength and this idea of local muscular endurance is going to have positive health benefits. We can use strength to predict survivability using grip strength or leg press strength, right? Especially in older adults, you need a certain amount of strength to do certain things, okay? So it is of some benefit for us to be able to actually test this, to assess it, to figure out where are you right now, okay? Are you doing okay? If we're going to train you or rehabilitate you, then over time, if we reassess and we reassess, are we making the progress that we want, okay? And so I'm going to talk some today about what are the characteristics of these tests. Like I know we had already mentioned the idea of a grip strength test or a leg press test, okay? But we're going to talk a little bit about what each test can tell us and what they can't tell us. And so outside of like the leg press test, remember there's not really one single test that is the single best way of assessing kind of whole body, total body muscular fitness, okay? Every test that we do is very, very specific to the body part or muscle groups that we're testing at that particular joint. It's also going to be very, very sensitive to the type of contraction that we're doing, okay? So I think we talked about this last week, but I will reiterate for us now that remember, right, from anatomy, there are three kinds of muscle contractions. We have isometric contractions where the muscle does not change length, okay? So in an isometric contraction, you are either pushing or contracting against a load, an external load that is so big that you can't move it at all, okay? Like you're pushing against the wall, let's just say, right? And maybe some of you are like Incredible Hulk, like strong or something, right? I'm thinking of you like Jenna or Lauren, like you guys are super strong, push on the wall, knock the wall down, okay? But you're gonna push, you can't push the wall down, so it's a static isometric contraction. That's one kind of way that we can do a test. You guys watched me do the grip strength test in class last week. We were going to do the grip strength test in lab. We may try and go ahead and do that if we can figure out. I may have my TA, if we do this on Wednesday, I may have Grant, my TA, come and at least be there where you can do that for you guys. That's an isometric test, okay? Your strength under isometric conditions is going to be different than if we're doing what's called a dynamic contraction, okay? Now, dynamic contractions are what most people think of as actual muscle contractions, okay? So I have, this is what I could find that was close. I have 2.5 pound weight, okay? And so if I'm doing curls with my 2.5 pound weight, which I know is super impressive for you guys, okay? So when I'm doing my curl, as I come up with my bicep, the actin and myosin are interacting, the myosin heads are tilting, I'm getting a power stroke, my bicep is shortening, okay? That's a concentric muscle contraction. So it's concentric, right? Shortening. When I then take it and I go back out the other direction, so I've curled up, now I'm going back out, okay? As I'm lowering the weight down in my bicep, what's happening is the muscle is lengthening, it's stretching back out. That's an eccentric contraction, okay? So dynamic contractions can be either concentric or eccentric, although most of the time when we do these from a testing standpoint, you're sort of putting them together. You're going to do a concentric contraction and then an eccentric contraction. So you're going to pick something up and then you're going to set it back down, okay? Most of the time, those are paired together. We don't always, sometimes in the lab, we will do only a concentric or only an eccentric contraction because we really, really care about what what's going to happen in the midst of all that. But those are dynamic contractions, okay? So remember, when we add movement into a contraction, okay, then when we have a velocity component because there is movement, that's going to alter the manner in which our cross bridges are going to either form and break and then form again. And so what typically happens is that when there is velocity, the higher the speed of movement, the lower the force we're going to have. So when you are going to assess a person's muscular strength, we need to prescribe to them a particular velocity. So like, we want you to do this curl in 1, 2, 3 seconds or something like that. Or we want you to do the curl in 1 second or 10 seconds, all right? So the speed of the contraction is going to play a role in how strong we're going to be able to observe that person be. So we just need to know that and understand that and be aware of it, because it will have some output. If what we really care about is the absolute maximum amount of weight that a person can lift, okay, the highest sort of dynamic contraction force that we can get, people are going to tend to move and go very, very slowly, because the slower we go, the higher the force we're going to be able to get. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. Okay. Additionally, the type of equipment that we use. So I'm doing curls with my weight here. That would be, say, free weights. Okay. There might also be machines and different kinds of machines that we can do. What typically happens is the machines are going to limit our range of motion. They may even limit our speed and those things, okay? So you may get a little bit of a different number on, say, a curl machine versus curling with a particular free weight, okay? You may also get different values if you were using, say, a resistance band. And so sometimes with the resistance band, we can't prescribe an actual number to it, but it's, you know, here's the very, very flexible kind of low force band, here's the in the middle band, and here's the very, very, very inflexible kind of heavy duty band. You see a lot more stuff with bands in muscles that are lower in strength during rehabilitative settings and those kinds of things. And that's a perfectly good and a perfectly reasonable way to kind of get an estimate of a person's strength. Okay. The last thing to keep in mind is that the range of motion that we ask the person to move through is also going to affect how strong they are. Okay. So again, with my curl, okay, think about any time you've ever lifted weights, okay, which I'm guessing that most of you have done something. Anytime that you've done some kind of a weight movement, there's usually a place in your range of motion that we very often refer to as, say, the sticking point, okay? It's a place where if I can lift the weight past this point in my range of motion, I'm likely going to be able to complete the rest of the range of motion, okay? And so think about this like from a curl standpoint. So if my full range of motion is full extension all the way up here to full flexion, okay? If I was to stand up where you guys could see things, what would typically happen is I'm going to do the curl, and somewhere right about at this point in my range of motion is going to be the sticking point. This is the place in my range of motion where I am the weakest, okay? And that is likely due to the moment arm around my elbow joint, okay? And so if I can lift the weight past about right here, then I'm going to be able to do the rest of it, okay? It's very rare that you get up to like here and you can't finish it off. It's because the moment arm is the shortest right at about here. Then if I can get past this, then I'm going to be able to do that, okay? Dynamic muscle contractions, okay? Be they concentric or eccentric, at whatever velocity you are going, they're going to test your strength, okay, at the weakest point in your range of motion, because you cannot complete a full range of motion unless you can get past that weak point. So that's one of the limitations of dynamic strength testing, okay? So I'm doing a squat and I'm going to squat down and come back up, but it's somewhere down kind of near kind of 90 degrees in my thigh to my lower leg, kind of 90 degree there at my knee is going to be the weakest point in my range of motion. And once I can clear that place, right, I can do that and I can do the rest of it. And so we just need to be aware of what that is and make sure that when we perform the test that we're comfortable with this was our range of motion. we care about that portion of the range of motion, and that when we do a retest or anything else, that we're going to make sure that we test in the same way. Because there may be instances when in rehabilitation or something that we want to very, very tightly limit the range of motion. We don't want to let a person go through a full range of motion because we think it's not safe. And so just need to keep all of that in mind. Okay. Does anybody have questions about that? Does that at least make some level of sense to you guys? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, something, anything. Okay. All right, well, just a few of you guys are there and are with me. Okay, excellent. Okay, so some other things to make sure of so that we can be comfortable that when we test, okay, that we're going to get what we would call a reliable and a valid outcome measure. And so these are things that we probably need to consider and that we need to take care of before you assess a person's strength, so that we can be confident that whatever value we get for their maximal strength or for their maximal muscular endurance, that it's real, okay? We've looked at how much you can squat, but we're confident that really is how much that you can squat. Okay, so one of the things to keep in mind is we need to follow very standardized testing protocols. Okay, we need to instruct people and pay attention to posture. Okay, and then as we said, speed of movement and range of motion. All right, it's good for us to tell people and demonstrate for them, here's what I want you to do. Here's the posture that you need to hold. Here is the speed that I want you to move at. Here's the full range of motion, and provide them some either verbal cues or visual cues for all of that. Let them practice is going to be the next thing. So standardized testing protocols, and we want to let them practice, okay? If we're having people do something, we call this familiarization. If we have people do something with which they are unfamiliar, okay? So let's imagine, like we would do in lab, that we're not going to get to do, that we were going to have everybody in class do a 1 repetition, the most weight that they can bench press 1 time, okay? There may be some of you that have never done a bench press, or there may be some of you that have done a bench press, but you've not done a bench press with a heavy weight very recently. And so what we know is that if you're not familiar with a movement, if we let you practice, like on one day you're going to practice, okay, you get to mess around with it, you get to kind of feel what it's like to do and move through that range of motion and those things, then we have you take a day off, come back a day later, and then we know that you're going to get a better number. You're going to be better at doing that particular lift because you've had a chance to become familiarized, okay? So if you know, like you're a PT or you're doing personal training, you're a strength coach, and you're introducing something new to your athletes or to your patients, you know, in an ideal world, you can have them on like their first day that they're there. We're going to familiarize them and let them practice. And then when we're going to wait, then in like on our second or our third time that we see them, then we're going to get our real true kind of a measure of where they are. Okay. People will always say that you should let folks warm up. My wife is in the other room here. She likes a nice warm up and a cool down. There's not a lot of scientific evidence that the warm up actually matters or does things. But anything that you read about how to do testing on people is to let them do some kind of like light aerobic warm up, let them do some stretching or something, even though stretching is dumb and may actually make you less strong in the midst of all of this, okay? My wife just wanted me to say that is this class all full of lies, as she, you know, says things from the other room. It's not a lie. Stretching doesn't really do much but make you more flexible. But we, you know, in encouraging things, sometimes people feel better about themselves if they can do all of that. But just keep those things in mind, okay? All right, so now a little bit of information about the kind of test that we are going to do, okay? So A dynamic strength test, so a strength test where we are moving against some external load. So we're picking a weight up and then setting it down, or we're squatting something up and down, or we're going to do something on what's called an isokinetic dynamometer, where it's basically a giant robot that will allow you to move, but it will measure things through the entire movement. Okay. Dynamic strength testing is the single most common way that we assess strength, okay? It has some advantages over, say, isometric testing, especially for people that are playing some kind of a sport, or we're doing rehab with someone and it's mimicking a movement that they do a lot, or they may have some trouble with in their everyday lives, okay? Then this tends to, your strength with this dynamic movement, because you're actually moving, is going to tend to correlate better with sport performance or performance of some dynamic movement task, which is mostly what we do throughout the day. Okay. Dynamic testing tends to be relatively inexpensive. Most people can have access to a gym or some free weights or machines or even some TheraBands or something like that. Okay. So it tends to be relatively inexpensive. It tends to be relatively accessible, okay? And there seems to be psychologically some benefit that people enjoy doing dynamic testing more, so they give a better effort in dynamic testing than in isometric, because people can physically see work being done. You can see the weight moving, okay? You can feel yourself going down and up if you're doing a squat or something like that. That's better than pushing against something and nothing happens, okay? And you're just going to measure your strength that way. All right. Disadvantages of dynamic testing is that we are measuring your strength at the weakest point in your range of motion. Okay. If we're doing a squat, what we're really measuring is, in that squat, how strong are you at your weakest point? Okay. It also tends to not be able to, when we do this, it's not very good at allowing us to measure strength at different movement velocities, because very often it's the most weight that you can lift, you tend to go very, very slow. And it's harder when we do this to try to, even when we put people on like a metronome, it's hard to get people to go at, at a slower or faster velocity very consistent. Okay. So those are kind of some of the big things with dynamic strength testing. The primary test that we do when we do dynamic strength testing is something called a 1 repetition maximum test, or a 1RM. Okay? And what a 1RM is it is simply the most weight that you can lift through a full range of motion at a prescribed velocity one time with good form. Okay? So the heaviest weight using good form that you can do once. This is considered to be the gold standard for dynamic strength testing. Okay. Now, things to consider about doing a 1RM. Okay. 1 rep maxes may not be appropriate for all muscle groups or all lifting types for all groups of people that we want to test. Okay. Because it involves lifting very heavy weights, it may not be advisable in people that are older, or in around a joint where a person either has or is recovering from an injury. It just may not be safe to do that, okay? Additionally, for some kinds of more complicated lifts, okay, even squats, but things like kind of power lifts, like a power clean or a clean and press, or something called a snatch, where you bend down with the weight and you fling it up in front of you like this, okay? For those kinds of exercises, especially in people that are not used to doing it, it may not be appropriate or safe, because their ability to do it with good form safely is not always going to be there. Okay? So things to keep in mind. Now, there are some derivations of the 1 rep max that we can perform that may allow us to either gather some information more safely, or we can do it in a slightly different way, and then we can consult some kind of research that is out there and estimate what your 1 rep max is by having you lift a lighter weight multiple times. Okay, and so we call these things a multiple RM. And so like if I was going to assess your 4RM, okay, your 4 repetition max, what that means is this is the most weight that you can lift 4 times, not once, but 4. So it's likely going to be a lighter weight than what you could lift once. And so by lifting a lighter weight, that may be safer for some people, okay? And it may be easier for people that are not great at their particular form. My cat is back again, Pumpkin, again, say hi, okay? And so, but we've done a lot of research on things like this, okay? You can do a 4RM or a 5RM or an 8RM or a 15RM. It doesn't really matter. It's the most weight you can lift that number of repetitions. But there are some, and I can post, if anybody cares, I can post it on Canvas for you guys. There are, sorry, I have cat hair in my mouth. There are tables. And what it is it's a way that says, okay, I can lift 100 pounds 4 times. And so then let's use that to estimate what my 1 rep max might be. And it might be like, okay, well, if I can lift 100 pounds 4 times, then I can probably lift 120 pounds once or something like that. Or if I can lift 100 pounds 8 times, then I can probably lift 140 or 150 pounds, okay? So we can use these multiple RMs. Either this is just my strength measure value, just using this, or we can use what you get with this to estimate your 1 rep max, okay? And so the thing with these, with doing a multiple RM, okay, and with doing a 1 RM is that you basically do it once, okay? And then if you got it, we have to give you more weight. And we basically to assess a 1 RM, we have to have you try to lift it 1 time until it's too heavy and you cannot do the lift. And so typically when you do a multiple RM, if we're trying to get your 4 RM, we need to have you lift it 4 times and then try to lift it 5 and you can't get a 5th, or you lift it 4 times and then we let you rest, we give you a little bit more weight and we say, now try to get it 4 times again. And with more weight, you can get 3, but you can't get 4. So the key with these things is that we have to keep pushing and pushing until you cannot do it again, or really you can't actually lift it the prescribed number of times, okay? That's probably the single biggest place that we mess up these kinds of dynamic strength testing, is we don't push people to try the lift and then fail, okay? You could lift 100 pounds once, but now I got to give you 110 pounds, and now you can't lift 110 pounds. Now I got to give you 105 pounds, and you can't lift 105 pounds, okay? But you can do 100. All right, does that make sense, everybody? You guys still with me on all of this? Okay, several of you are, okay, very good, cool. All right, so here are the procedures for doing a 1 rep max test. We would normally kind of focus more on this in a lab, but what I'm going to do as part of your lab, since we can't do this in person, is I'm going to have you guys look at this, and then I've got some YouTube videos of people actually walking through the procedures for doing 1 rep max testing on the bench press, which is what we would normally do in lab, okay? And so I'm not going to talk very much right now about all of this. I'm just going to I'm going to let you guys watch those videos. It's relatively straightforward, okay? And then if any of you want to go off and do this on your own and come back and report to us, or you want to share something, then that would be great, okay? Okay, so we've got all of this, we're converting. All right, so our next kind of dynamic strength testing is going to be on something called an isokinetic dynamometer. And so that's what this picture is. This is what's called a Biodex, but there are several brands, but they're all basically the same thing, okay? And so, excuse me, we have one. If we were in the classroom today, I'd have all of you guys turn around and you can see the one in the back of the classroom. If you take exercise physiology lab as a class, then you guys will learn how to do testing on this isokinetic dynamometer. And so it can do some really, really cool and interesting things. The problem is that one of these things brand new cost about $70,000 to $75,000. Okay. The one that we have in the lab, we bought used, and I think they gave us a deal on it, and it was about 16 grand. It was a refurbished one. And so they're quite expensive. Okay. They're quite expensive. But they are, in essence, a kind of a giant computer-controlled robot. Okay. And so what you can see here in our lovely model from the 1980s here is that she's sitting in the chair. We have her nice and strapped down. And then what we have is her ankle is strapped to this little arm that is connected to a motor that is right here. And so what we can do then is we can have her kick against this. So she kicks out with her ankle. She's going to do a knee extension, and we can set the computer up so that the robot functions in a couple of ways. It can either only allow this arm to move at a particular speed. So like we can tell it, okay, we want this to move at 60 degrees per second or something like that. Okay, so that if she's going to go through, I don't know, about a 90 or 100 degrees of range of motion, that it's going to take her a little, about a second and a half to do all of it. It will only let her leg move that fast. Okay, and so by doing that, then what we can measure is what is her maximal force at that particular speed. Then we can change it and say, okay, we'll now move at 120 degrees per second. And so we can have her kick as hard as she can, and it will go at 120 degrees per second. And so it will let us look at the effects of changing velocity of movement on how strong you are. It also, because embedded in this piece right here that is attached to her ankle, there's a force transducer in there. And that force transducer is always measuring the force being exerted down here by her ankle on this. And so what happens is that as this moves through its full range of motion, we can tell where in the range in motion is she the strongest and is she the weakest. Okay, so down here, if she was at a very, very kind of deep knee angle, she's going to be weaker. About where you see her leg now is going to be the strongest, and as she comes out closer and closer to extension, then she's going to get weaker again. And so using the dynamometer, because it very tightly controls range of motion, because it very tightly controls velocity, we can learn some additional information about things. And so for certain athletes, depending upon what they do, we may want to know, are they gaining strength at higher or lower contraction velocities? Because that's going to be more appropriate for what their event is. If you have a person that is rehabilitating, sometimes using the dynamometer, because it is going to more tightly control velocity and range of motion, it can be a little safer than just saying, here, I want you to go do a squat, and we're going to work on your knee extensor strength by doing squats. Okay, so we can learn some stuff from all of this that we can't by doing 1 rep max testing. But again, the machine is very, very expensive. Okay, these were really popular in the 80s and the 90s in a lot of rehabilitation clinics. I think Athletics has one over in one of their things. And if you guys ever work in PT clinics or OT clinics, some hospitals and some clinics have them, but a lot of them don't anymore because they've just kind of become kind of overly expensive and a little bit superfluous. Okay. Okay. Now, isometric strength testing is very, very commonly done for assessing grip strength, like what we did in class last week. Okay. It's simple, it's cheap, it saves time. You just hand the dynamometer to somebody and you say, squeeze as hard as you can. Okay. There are some other derivations of those things. We have a couple. One where you stand on a platform and you have a little handlebar connected to a chain, and you try to pick up like as hard as you can against it, and it won't let you move. And we can measure like your trap strength and things that way, or your low back strength in that particular way. Okay. The disadvantages to isometric testing is people are very likely to perform the Valsalva maneuver during. So you're going to hold your breath, and that's going to make your blood pressure go up really, really high. And so especially in older adults that already have high blood pressure, then that's going to potentially be kind of put them at a higher risk. Okay. Also, it doesn't tend to correlate particularly well with sport performance or performance during dynamic movements. Okay. And it's very, very specific to the joint angle at which we're testing. Okay. So when you do the grip strength, you can change whether your hand is way out like this when you squeeze, or if it's curled way in like this when you squeeze, or somewhere in the middle, and your strength value is going to change. And so it's very specific to the range of motion or the joint angle at which we're assessing things. Okay. What's this? So there's a couple of field tests for muscular endurance. We're going to do these things in lab. We're going to do a push-up test and an abdominal curl or a sit-up test, okay? And so what happens with these for the most part is you're going to do as many push-ups as you can in a minute, or you're going to do as many push-ups as you can until you can't do any more, or you're going to do as many sit-ups as you can in a minute, or you're going to do sit-ups until you can't do any more. So you're going to end up in a lot of people with these much, much higher kind of repetitions when you do things this way. Okay. If you cannot perform 15 repetitions, and please make note of this, this is really, really, really important and really key. To assess local muscular endurance, whatever the weight is that you're doing or whatever you're having the person do, if they can't do it at least 15 times, then it's a measure of strength and not a measure of endurance. Okay, so for most of you guys, when you do the push-up test and the curl-up test, you're going to be able to do so many that it's going to be a test of endurance. Most of you will not have any problems doing 15 push-ups or 15 sit-ups. Okay, they're really 15 crunches. Okay, all right. So what I want us to do now is let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, and then we're going to come back. We'll wrap up on the assessment tools, and then I'm going to put you guys into some groups. In some breakout rooms, and we're going to start talking about how we would actually prescribe. Let's say we know what your strength is. How do we prescribe exercise to people to be as effective as possible? Okay, so let's take it. So let's come back at exactly noon. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, we're going to resume our recording now. So for lab, what we're going to do is you guys are going to do a push-up test. You guys are going to do the abdominal curl test, and so we're going to get some values from all of this. I should tell you that for like 1 rep max values, as well as muscular endurance values, that generally the way that we interpret these things there are what we call normative values, and so we would look at things and say, like, we had Maddie do as many push-ups as she possibly could, and then we can compare her to some data from where they've tested thousands and thousands of women of a roughly similar age, and you can kind of look at where you fall in relation to everybody else, and you can say, ooh, I'm better than most people, I'm worse than most people, I'm kind of right in the very, very middle. And so as part of lab, that's exactly what you guys are going to do. You're going to do your own test, and then you're going to compare your values to these normative values, but then we're also going to have you compare your values to some previous data that we have from other classes. So we'll see, like, are you guys as good at doing push-ups as some previous groups? Are you better? Are you worse? Etc. Okay, so that's kind of how we tend to interpret these things. Okay. All right. So what I want to do then is I'm actually going to stop sharing. I'm going to pause we're resuming our recording. So now I can ask you guys questions about all of this, okay? So as a bit of preface to everything, okay? There is a right and a wrong way to go and exercise, okay? There is a right thing to do within some level of flexibility for the number of days per week that you need to exercise or do a particular kind of workout. There is a right and a wrong kind of number of sets and reps and exercises and things that we want to do. And this is an area where it can be in a lot of ways really, really simple and really straightforward. But a lot of times, if you read stuff in magazines or you talk to trainers and things, they will try to make it much, much more difficult, okay? And so we're going to start talking about this. And then part of what you guys are going to do is going to be due at the end of next week. You're going to have to find a workout online somewhere, okay? And you're then going to have to critique that. And you're going to have to look at what are they telling you to do, how many days per week, how many sets, how many reps, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to have to write some stuff about all of that. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time on this because I think it's really, really important. Okay, so on the chat now, everybody, if you can scroll back up and let's look at kind of what we can see here with everything. What we can see is, I'm going to try this, guys. So if I share my screen like this, what do you guys see? If I put everybody out like this, do you guys just see the PowerPoint thing, or do you see like everybody and the whole Zoom interface? And I've now put the chat box up. Like, can you guys see the chat box on my screen, or do you just see like the PowerPoint?
Just the PowerPoint.
Just the PowerPoint. Okay. Then we're not going to share. I'm going to turn that off. All right. So then what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go in the chat thing. All right. So Chandler, we're going to start with your group. So who all was in your group, Chandler?
Let me open our. It was me, Jenna, Maddie, and Elizabeth.
All right, so y'all are sort of in the firing line here first, okay? So you guys have what looks like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday kind of thing. So we're doing 6 days per week of exercise, all right? Monday, we're doing the Stairmaster. I already hate you guys. The Stairmaster is like the worst thing in the entire world. The abduction, adduction machines, single leg RDLs. Do you guys want to explain to the class what an RDL is?
It's basically like a straight leg deadlift, so minimal bend in your knee, and you come down.
Okay.
With the dumbbell, kettlebell, and then stand back up.
I don't know if you guys can see me. I'm going to try this. It's kind of hard, but you kind of bend over like so, and then up. Your legs are mostly straight. Okay. That's an RDL. That will become important in a minute. Tuesday, we're doing back squats. As opposed, I assume, Chandler, that you guys do front squats. Which just means that you're holding the weight back here on your back rather than in the front. Okay, so 3 sets of 8 repetitions, 60 to 70% of what, I guess, is my next question there that you guys had.
Like of your 1 rep max.
Of our 1 rep max, okay. Very good, 20 minutes of steady state cardio, blah, already don't like that. Wednesday, deadlift, 5 sets of 8. Man, y'all are really into doing some deadlifts. At 60%, I assume, of 1 rep max. Some core workouts, so maybe some sit-ups or some plank or something. We've already talked about the usefulness of that. Thursday, front squats and split squats, okay? Friday, box jumps, broad jumps, steady state cardio. Ooh, y'all are really getting after it. Saturday, 6 sets of 2 on the back squat, 80 to 90%, and some weighted lunges. And then Sunday, mercifully, we get to rest on everything. Okay. So Chandler or somebody else from your group, like, why y'all are doing a bunch of stuff? So why did you guys think that was necessary, and how did you come up with this like 60 to maybe 75% on a lot of days, and then the one day of like 80 to 90? Like, what was your rationale behind that?
I work at a gym, so this is like typically what we would prescribe, and doing like 3 days a week of like things where we could watch what they're actually doing. So like you notice they're back squatting 2 days a week and front squatting 1 day a week. So those would be the days
Yes.
they're like in the gym with us where we could watch.
Okay.
But then, like the other days, like the broad jumps, box jumps, steady state cardio, those are things they can do on their own.
Okay.
That's just more like accessory, or even like not necessary, but if they were wanting to work out that day, then.
Okay. No, that's tremendous. I would tell you guys that probably the most difficult thing that is in there are the box jumps and those kinds of things. That's probably actually the highest intensity, which may seem weird, even though y'all are doing like back squats at like 90% of 1 rep max. But in general, okay, you're working kind of the muscles, or you're doing squats basically 3 days per week, somewhere in that 60 to 70% range. That's going to be kind of right there, and then doing some other kinds of things. So no worries with all of that. Okay. So that group is basically 3 days per week, maybe 3 to 4 sets in a lot of ways. The one kind of really high intensity day, we're kind of there. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're going to look at what everybody else is doing, is going to do there. Okay. Megan in here. Yeah, there's Megan.
Yeah.
Megan, who else was in your group?
Hold up, let me get back to where that was.
That's okay.
It was me, Taylor, Claire, and Janelle.
Okay. And so do any of you guys work in a gym? Chandler was working in the gym, so she's already like good to go or with all of this. Anybody in there working the gym?
I used to work at a gym when I was back at home, but
Okay.
not in here.
Okay. Very good then, Janelle. So we'll see kind of what you guys, if y'all came up with the same thing. So how many days per week? Around 3. Sets and reps, 3 to 4 sets, 8 to 12 reps. Add weights or reps each week as the level gets easier. 60 to 80% of one rep max that they should be doing. And you guys pick this because that's what the ACSM recommendations, or the American College of Sports Medicine recommendations. So again, about 3 days per week, 3 to 4 sets, 8 to 12 reps, 60 to 80%. Now, what you guys put is that's great and that's wonderful. It also makes me wonder if you just went to the ACSM prescription slide that we have a little bit farther down, and then just took stuff right from there, which would have been perfectly okay. And so that's fine. So y'all are not that far off from kind of what Chandler and them, what their group was coming up with. Okay. So pretty good. All right. Let me do this. Leah, your group. So we've got Derek and Michael and Isabella. Full body workout 3 or 4 times a week. Microcycles. We haven't even talking about microcycles already. We're talking about periodization now. 2 to 3 weeks each cycle. Increase weight with every cycle. Lower reps, hypertrophy, strength, power, 1 rep max. I know what most of those things are, but I'm not kind of really. So full body. So how many sets, how many reps were you guys thinking that one should do in the midst of all of this? And how are you going to determine how much weight you were going to lift? So could you give us a little bit more detail? And Leah, it doesn't have to be you. It could be anybody.
Yeah, so the weight goes off of a percentage intensity of your 1 rep max. Like for hypertrophy, in the realm of like 10 to 12 reps. Strength, go down to 6 to 8 reps. Power, 3 to 5, and then your 1 rep max.
Okay. That makes sense, Derek. So you guys have talked about some kind of more specific-y things, but again, 3 to 4 days a week, right? Kind of how many sets were you thinking, Derek? Or did you say that and I just miss it?
Between 3 to 4 sets. Higher sets when we get down to the higher weight.
Okay. So that group is talking about that we may want to alter the sets and the reps based upon what your goal of training might be, if it's hypertrophy or strength or power. That is a little more kind of fungible and sophisticated way of looking at things, and we can talk on Wednesday about kind of what some of that stuff means and kind of its utility. Okay, so but again, it's a very reasonable kind of thing to do. I know we only have a few minutes left here, so Kayla, we're going to look at y'all's thing. Day one, high rep, low weight, focusing on form, 40 to 50% of max, okay, and doing some arms, decrease, okay, 3 sets of 12 to 15, same thing, okay. You guys are all kind of in the right about the same place. Let's look at Nick's group, 3 times per week, lower limb strength and hypertrophy, back squats, leg machine, 4x12, 4x8. They're just saying heavy weights, right? So Nick, I'll ask for y'all's group, when you say like do a heavy weight or do a moderate to high weight, like what does that mean? What's a heavy weight?
Well, since it's so individual specific,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously heavy weights, lower reps, higher weights, higher reps. So
Sure.
that's why we put rep ranges for individuals to stay between. So it would be those maximal amount of reps that you're able to perform with like adequate form.
Okay.
So you can stay within those rep ranges since it's so individual specific.
Okay, but so how might we go about kind of determining what that might need to be? Like I
I mean,
completely agree with you.
we could do percentages of 1 rep max too, and then just
Okay.
take lower, higher percentages. But like, I mean, that would just dedicate another day to figuring that out, I guess.
Yes, and that's probably a really, really important kind of thing, as you guys will see kind of as we get to things. We probably, if we have the ability to determine a 1 rep max, we absolutely want to do that because it makes the prescription much, much more accurate in a lot of ways. But what you guys are getting at kind of in general is that's very, very good. And then my last one, banded squats. Oh God, cable kickbacks, front squats. Ugh. This gives me flashbacks to things that I don't like. 4 sets, 12, 10, 8 and 8, lower weight, add weight, that's fine. 3 days a week with a rest day in between. Okay. So very cool. All right. So guys, most of this, and I know we're about to run out of time. I didn't estimate particularly well in kind of in the midst of all of this. So what I will do is we'll just kind of talk about this one. We'll talk about this in a very general sense, and then we'll pick it up and kind of finish it off on Wednesday. Okay. In general, you guys did really, really well. Okay. So that begs the question for me. One, you guys are good at this, and you've kind of read ahead in things, which is awesome. How many of you guys have had like a class where you've done this before? Like you've had personal training class or like principles of strength and conditioning or something like that? Who's had a class? Anybody?
I have.
Derek's had a class. Okay, that makes perfect sense given some of the things that you were talking about. Anybody else? Obviously, Chandler works in a gym, and so she does this, and Janal had worked in a gym, and so you guys have some kind of practical experience with all of that. But anybody else had those classes that we offer in the department? No? Okay. Well then, so for many of you guys that are kind of seeing or interacting with some of this material for the first time, you guys did a really, really nice job, okay? And so for the most part, what you guys put on there, all of this stuff is going to work. It's going to work really, really well, okay? And so in general, 2 to 3 days per week, okay, for a particular muscle or muscle group, doing a couple of different exercises that are going to target that muscle group, and then doing somewhere between 2 and 4 sets, maybe 6 to 12 repetitions or with a weight that's going to be maybe 60 to 80% or higher of your 1 rep max for that particular lift. And if you can do that consistently, you're going to see increases in strength within just a couple of times of working out. And we're going to, if we do that consistently for maybe 8 to 10 weeks, we're going to start to see hypertrophy. Okay. And so if that's what we want to do, it might come as a surprise to you guys that there's a lot of people that don't actually do that. And there's lots of things like, oh, we're going to do 12 sets of 2 reps on one day, and then on this other day we're going to do 2 sets of 30 reps or something like that. And so as my dad would like to say, which maybe this is just kind of an Arkansas saying, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, which kind of makes me question some things, why we're wanting to skin a cat in that particular way. But there's a lot of different ways to get at this, okay? We can make this super duper complicated, or we can make it a little bit more basic, okay? And so what you guys came up with is all going to work really, really well. But there's a couple of other principles that we need to be aware of, okay, that are going to affect how things go from one week to the next or from 1 month to the next, as long as we're kind of being consistent within all of these things, okay? And those 2 things that we need to be very, very, very focused on is something called progression, and then another thing that we have to focus on is something called overload, okay? And those are going to be the 2 things that we'll spend a lot of our time at the start of class on Wednesday, that we'll spend our time talking about. Like, how do we achieve adequate amounts of progression? What does that mean? What does that look like? And then how do we achieve adequate amounts of overload? Because I can tell you guys that the thing, or the 2 things that people do not consistently do when they do resistance training, or any kind of training for that matter, is they do not adequately overload and they do not adequately progress what it is that they're doing. And because of that, they're really going to limit the amount of increases in strength and hypertrophy that people are going to see. Those are the 2 areas, okay, that people don't do a great job of. And part of that is just that it's hard to do it. Like, it's physically difficult to go in and push yourself in that way. And then other times they find some programs where you don't, there's not a lot of great information out there about some of that. Okay. All right. So everybody make sure that with whatever you put in, okay, that one person from your group sends me like a PDF or a Word document that has what you guys came up with every group member's name on it. Okay. Please make sure that you do that. I will give you guys an assignment credit for having been in class and having done this today, okay? Then I'm going to think this evening, I'm going to talk to our TA, I'm going to talk to Grant, but I think right now I'm leaning towards that I will just have you guys do lab at home and not actually bother coming in. But I'm going to see what Grant thinks about doing that. But right now we're going to lean for that. Okay, so on the schedule, and I don't know where we are on our days, the next in-class day that we would have after finishing kind of this part of this lecture would be to have the in-class lab day. Okay, so my plan though is what we will do is on Wednesday, we will meet like this. We will talk about kind of finishing up the prescription portion of things. We'll do a group assignment kind of thing in class again. I will find a couple of workouts that I will post during class for you guys to look at, and then as a group you all will work on doing some critiques, and then I will go through and explain what I want you to do with lab, how long you have to do it, kind of what that needs to look like from a lab report standpoint. I'll answer questions about that, and I will give information about doing the first exercise critique, where you have to go off and find your own workout program to critique. So we probably won't have class for the full 2 hours on Wednesday, but we'll do some lecture and then a lot of kind of informational stuff as it relates to our kind of next group of assignments. Okay. Anybody have questions about that or anything? Are we okay? All right, and so we are not, guys, we are not super long. We got a couple more things. We're not super long away from kind of having our first test. So just kind of start thinking about that in the back of your mind, kind of keep that there. Okay. All right. If there are no questions, then